The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are back for yet another week of the Nerdcast Empire on all your favorite podcast sources. I am Matt, back in the studio once again this week. Joining me this week is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It's going pretty well here.
Going to be diving into some new content areas, not necessarily areas of focus, but new types of shows we're going to be debuting over the next few weeks on the Nerdcast Empire. Rachel and Chris will be joining us again on some future episodes, but just the two of us this week. And we're going to kind of debut something that's going to eventually, hopefully, become a weekly podcast on the Nerdcast Empire, and that is the topic of music and music releases. We're going to try to stay on top of the latest music that is out there, mostly rock and metal, although if something outside of that spectrum really catches our ear, we certainly can include it in this segment, but kind of introduce what this is going to look like. We've talked about trying to keep up with new stuff because there's so much music out there, and just like a bunch of people in a random town can put a podcast up for the world to listen to. Pretty much if you got the ability to record music anywhere, you'll have the ability to get that music out in front of everybody, whether it's something more fan related like Bandcamp makes it very easy, but also, you know, being able to get your stuff on Apple Music or YouTube Music so that people can hear it. And this is a chance for us to find some new stuff, because I feel like a lot of our music fandom, certainly my music fandom in the rock and metal space, came from the old days of you finding things out on the internet when it was far more difficult to do so, and bringing it back and sharing it. So this is kind of a modern take of how I became a metal fan, and certainly an era that helped you find a bunch of new bands.
Yeah. And to your first statement about kind of branching out and hitting other areas, I think it would be so easy to just kind of pigeonhole ourselves as we talk about pro wrestling. But the reality is we have a lot more interest than that. Like, that doesn't take up nearly as much time as maybe the recent podcast episodes would suggest.
I think the pro wrestling stuff's very easy to do podcasts on, especially because there has been a ton of news in the pro wrestling front. Even when you're not just talking current events, you're just talking about the Vince McMahon stuff and The Rock, and you've got the news of Stardom, and there's just so many current event things that are just nuts that it makes it very easy to fall into that trap where you're just constantly talking about it. But not just this music podcast, but we're going to do a similar anime podcast, which we'll actually preview on next week's Sunday edition of the Nerdcast Empire. We're also going to do episodes of video games the same way. It's going to allow us to really show you that the Nerdcast Empire is more than just a pro wrestling podcast.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even rule out just the random wild card episode if something seems noteworthy enough that might be, you know, tangentially connected to something we do care about. We could even cover that.
Yeah, I think that's the goal here on the Nerdcast Empire, is to try to bring more content to you. We seem to continue to be gaining listeners, which we're incredibly grateful for. So we want to try to take advantage of that and give you more things to listen to. For everybody who's found our podcast since this thing started. And I think this is the 30th episode this week, which is kind of crazy that we've been doing it this long. But
I really thought I'd be retired by now.
not quite there yet. But speaking of retired, we do have a Nerdcast Empire store. So if you'd like to help in our retirement fund, actually, it's just going to go back to paying the expenses. It does take a lot to run a podcast. A lot of money has gone into it already, most out of my bank account. But I would like to eventually get to the point where the Nerdcast Empire starts at the very least to be break even for the project, and then hopefully maybe be able to make some money so we can do more cool things. But that's the goal. You can check out the Nerdcast Empire store. We're not making a ton off of that, but we do want to get our merch out there. So check it out. You can go to nerdcastempire.com/store, or you can click the store link at the top of the Nerdcast Empire page. That all circles back around to why we're doing this music podcast and why we're going to do an anime podcast, try to get into the current releases. And so we're going to be doing this episode, and then starting a week from Monday, we're going to start having this episode every week. You were able to find a couple of really good sources, and you're constantly on the lookout for even more good sources, but it kind of started with a Loudwire that had a list of the current releases, and has branched into you finding a bunch of YouTube channels that have some outstanding new releases.
Yeah, and I think that's always the problem when your music interests don't align with what's popular and what's available. You know, I'll never not know when Taylor Swift is releasing a new album, but that doesn't really do a whole lot for me. And this even goes back to the old days with some of the earlier bands that I learned about in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was the kid who didn't really enjoy nu metal. I wasn't a Limp Bizkit fan. I didn't like Korn. I didn't hate them, but that wasn't my music. I was more 80s thrash metal guy and melodic metal. So where was I going to go to find it? And back then it was going to internet relay chat rooms where basically people would have bots set up where you could download their list of MP3s they would serve you, and then you would queue up and download them that way. And on dial-up internet, it was not a quick process. There were a lot of nights of, I hope I don't get disconnected overnight as I queue up for an entire album and hope it's there in the morning. So yeah, fast forward to now, and Loudwire, I first found it late last year, where they have a webpage dedicated to weekly releases of hard rock and metal bands. And while it's probably not exhaustive, it's certainly more than I ever would have known about on my own. Before that, even, I stumbled into a YouTube page called New Wave of Traditional Heavy Metal Full Albums. And that's been a tremendous resource too. I don't know what connections this channel has to find these albums, but there's so many. And I certainly would recommend checking it out just to see if there's something cool that you would like there.
Yeah, no question about that. And we'll try to link all these things out in our YouTube videos. And the plan eventually, I don't know that we'll do it right away, but the plan eventually is to be able to take some of these smaller bands that we recommend and incorporate maybe clips of their music videos into our YouTube podcast release. Can't do that on our podcast platforms due to copyright and things like that. We don't want to risking our podcast taken down. But you talk about the IRC days, it feels very much like the early days of anime and the old fan sub tape trade when you had cassette. And obviously that's how music sharing started, was the tape trade of the 80s. It's funny how both of those interests kind of parallel in that way, because obviously with anime, you did have fan subbing starting, mid 90s, late 90s. Again, started on VHS, moved to digital, eventually then kind of got out of control as these companies started licensing everything. People were still do find it illegally. And we always recommend supporting the legitimate releases of things. We're not in favor of piracy by any stretch, but at that time, a lot of cases, that was the only way you could get it. You couldn't just go to the record store. You couldn't just go and buy it online and have them ship it to you. That didn't exist. So you had to get creative if you wanted to listen to things that were, like you said, outside of the mainstream.
Yeah, and honestly, timing worked out pretty well in that I was certainly too young to ever really be involved in the old heavy metal tape trading days. But by the time I really got into it, that was when the internet kind of first started becoming a thing. So, you kind of take for granted, even at that point in time, that it was pretty easy to find new stuff. And even also with anime, really, I was never so into it back in the early 2000s or late 90s where I felt the need to sail the seas to try to find something new. Whatever was coming out at that point in time was typically more than enough for me.
And I think companies, both in the music sphere and in the anime sphere, have done a much better job of making things available legally quicker, which has taken a lot of the excuses out for people who are looking to steal things, because you can get your hands on just about everything legally. And in most cases, digitally within days of the release. So you don't ever have to worry about, never came out over here, so I gotta go find it. However, there are still a few things that are really obscure, but for the most part, you can get your hands on it. And so it's our job over these next coming weeks to tell you what you need to get your hands on. That's the goal of this podcast. And really excited. Basically, the goal is to eventually do this kind of week by week. But since this is our first episode, we open it up to basically anything that's been released so far this year, but primarily from the month of January. And we're going to, in our first segment of this podcast, talk about some things that have come out recently. And then in the second segment of our podcast, we're going to go into the vault, talk about albums that we have physical copies of that have influenced our music tastes over the years. So it'll be a chance to kind of talk about why they're important. And then in our weekly episode, in the final segment, we'll be talking about some things that we see on upcoming releases that we'll be excited about. We won't do that today, but we will do that in future episodes. But I think the most stunning thing about this whole process before we get into your new releases is how much good stuff is out there that I just didn't even know existed.
Yeah, absolutely. I've said it for a while, but even to that degree, I don't know if I fully comprehended My thought was always, whatever you're into, someone's out there making it. I don't think I realized just how many people were out there making it until I really started searching. And you'd be amazed at how many bands have Bandcamp sites with physical releases, digital releases, merchandise. Like they're out there doing essentially what we're doing on the music side of things, whereas we were just talking about it.
And that does bring up one more point before I get to your new release choices for the month. If you're a local band, local to Southern Ohio in this area doing rock and metal, and you want to get your stuff on the Nerdcast Empire, reach out to us. You can hit us on social media. You can, I don't know how else you can get a hold of us, but that's probably the easiest way. I think there's even a contact form on our website. Reach out to us because we would love to promote local bands because that's something I've always wanted to do. We can even possibly set up and do interviews as part of our podcasts and let you tell your story. Like we love music. We want to promote music. It's kind of the whole thing. Very similar to how we're going to go around and try to, visit some of these retro game stores and, try to promote. I think it's not just about us. It's about us trying to be a voice for people who maybe just aren't able to get the word out there that they even exist. So I'm excited to do that. Please reach out to us if you're a local rock or metal band in Southern Ohio, specifically Southwestern Ohio. But honestly, if you're somewhere else that we're within driving range and we can get to, we're happy to do that. Northern Kentucky, Southeast Indiana, also kind of in our range. Just let us know, reach out to us and we'll see if we can make it work. But we're going to get to this first segment. We're going to talk about new releases. You have 3 really good new releases. A couple of them would have ended up on my list had you not chosen them, but I tried to choose some different ones. We're going to try to keep it between 3 and 5 each month. I did go ahead and go with the maximum of 5, and you'll see why in a moment because there's a couple of things on my list that are a little unique, and I wanted to make sure people were aware that they were out there. So we're going to start with yours because I consider you to be the metal guru of this podcast. And Chris obviously has a great music background as well, and we'll be getting him involved in future episodes of this music show. But we're going to let you choose first and let us know what your choices were for the top releases of the month of January.
For the first choice of mine would have to be a band called Mega Colossus with their newest album, Showdown. It's a 6-track album. It came out on January 26th. Just traditional heavy metal band. They're from Raleigh, North Carolina. Been around since 2005, which again, as I've gone through these, I'm amazed at how some of these bands have been around as long as they have. And I just have not been aware of them. I've been very much asleep at the wheel. According to their Bandcamp page, they have 7 releases so far, going all the way back to 2005, 2006. For this album, it's very melodic, kind of Iron Maiden-ish at times. Check out the tracks Fortune and Glory, Showdown, and Warden of the Wicked Road. Definitely standouts among the 6.
Yeah, this was definitely one I would have chosen. The artwork on this album is outstanding. Check that out if you get a chance. It's something I'm going to be saying a lot when I get to my choices. It's what I like in that type of rock. It's rock that rocks hard, but it's also very easy to listen to. It's something you can have on in the background. It fits so much into the type of music that I like from that era. And like you said, shocking they've been around that long and I've never heard of them. And if they've been releasing stuff like this, I definitely want to go back and check their back catalog.
Yeah, and speaking of their artwork, it definitely has that reminiscence of like Ed Repka artwork from the classic Megadeth albums and a lot of the metal bands from the 80s, just its own style. And you really kind of hope that they run with that and they keep kind of having that style with their album art.
It's funny because so much of the artwork nowadays, especially in the metal sphere, is just how ridiculous can we make our logo so that you can't read it. I've always said there is a direct correlation between how unreadable your logo is and how hard your music is. Like when it gets to the point where you can't read it, that's beyond typically what I like to listen to. Some of it still falls into kind of your area, but I always appreciate when a band is creative with their album art, something that's going to stand out. And this was one that was so standout-ish, I guess, that like you want to get it on a shirt and display that album art. And I think that should be the goal when you're creating album art is, number one, it shouldn't look AI. It shouldn't look like something I can create in 5 minutes with ChatGPT or whatever the AI art websites are. And, I think it should be more than just your band name. Like, give me something that gives me an idea of what you're trying to convey in the album. And then they did that on all counts.
Yeah, there's a certain authenticity to it that I think you're looking for. And even though, we've looked at AI generated fake album art through X for a while now. And even though some of that can be really cool, it kind of gives that hollow feeling of like, oh, is the music going to resemble this as well, where there doesn't really feel like there's any personality to it?
I'm not a huge fan. It's fun to look at, and it is interesting to see where AI art is going. But yeah, I think it gives me the feeling that you're taking a shortcut, and that concerns me when it comes to the quality of the album. So if you're a tiny band and that's all you can afford, like, I get it. But if you've got some sort of backing behind you, or you're a few albums into your releases, like, find an art. The artists are everywhere. Like, if you can go to Fiverr and have somebody draw you an album art, make that extra effort, because I really do think it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I think if I were in that position, I would almost reach out to numerous artists. Obviously the budget's a concern, but kind of see what they come up with and make a contest out of it. Even like, here's, the best one's the one we're using. We might have alternative art elsewhere in the booklet or something, but to me, it's a lot cooler to get a real human's brain involved and seeing what their interpretation of whatever message you have is.
Yeah, no doubt about that. So that was your first choice. What is next on your list?
Yeah, my next choice is a Canadian metal band who actually are an award-winning band. They won a Juno Award back in 2020 for their previous album, Play to Win. That band is Striker with their newest release, Ultra Power.
It's another group that as soon as I listen to this track or this album, I'm like, yep, that's definitely something I would have on rotation. And there's so much good metal music coming out of Canada. We talk a lot about European metal, but I feel like Canadian metal sometimes flies under the radar for whatever reason. I don't know if they just get lumped in with American bands for some reason, and maybe people don't really think of them. But another really good release, again, very much in line. Of the three choices you had, the first two you listed were definitely two that I would have included on my list, because I feel like they're very much in line with, in fact, I think in line with a lot of the choices I ended up making, but definitely check that one out.
Yeah, the thing about these guys is you listen to their music and it's great. It's great workout music, because a lot of it has a certain level of like 80s, like movie training montage sound to it, for lack of a better way to put it. I just, there are saxophones in some of the songs. It's just got this bombast to it that, with album or with song titles like Best of the Best of the Best, Give It All, City Calling, Thunderdome, Live to Fight Another Day. If you were going to do a remake of Bloodsport or something, that you would contract this band to do the majority of the music.
I love that type of music. I think there's a great place for that, especially in metal and hard rock. The 80s was full of that. And I've even got at least one band on my list that for my releases that kind of falls into that same category, where you get that feeling you're transported back, and you have this, like you said, workout montage, some sort of battle to overcome some sort of enemy. You're using this music to pump you up. And yeah, it was a really outstanding release. So what was third on your list?
Third kind of goes in a little different direction, but oddly enough, they're actually the oldest band out of my list of three. It's a German rock band. They kind of got lumped in as like a new metal band back in the early 2000s, but they've been around since 95. And it's a band called Emil Bulls with their newest album, Level Fix It.
This was one that I don't want to say I didn't care for it. I thought it was good. There wasn't really anything on your list, and you gave me a pretty extensive list of things that you kind of had marked as potential top releases of January. And while this one maybe didn't jump to the top of my list, it was very solid. And definitely when I listened to it, it kind of fits into what I know your tastes in music are. So it made a ton of sense that it ended up in your top three.
Yeah, I first ran into it with the title track, Level Fix It. And it just, I don't know what it was. It was just different. It felt kind of new metal-y, but still fresh. It didn't feel like something that was recorded in 2003. It just still has that melodic side that maybe some of the new metal stuff didn't really have as much of. But yeah, I think it's definitely, they're a band I kind of want to look more into, knowing that they've had 16 albums since 95, and I've not really had them on my radar ever.
I would really be curious to see how they've evolved as a band when you're in it for that long. And obviously they were in it during the new metal era. So I'm kind of curious if what their releases in the early 2000s would have sounded like, because that was definitely a vibe that I got off of that music. But I think different is a good way to describe it. And I think with stuff like that, typically for me to get into it, I need multiple listens to kind of get through the difference. It's not something, so much of the stuff that we're choosing this month is very catchy. Like if you're into hard rock, metal, melodic metal, probably from the first listen, you're going to know whether it's something you want or not. This is one for me that if I listen to the album a couple times, I think it would probably grow on me because it takes a little time because it is so different. But again, I like that we have, and we will be recommending things that are not going to sound the same as the other things, because there's so much good stuff out there. And I always appreciate a band that's willing to go in a little bit of a different direction to try to make their sound stand out in an era where you have so much competition out there.
Yeah, it's definitely different than most of the stuff on the list. And even the giant list from Loudwire, this was something that wasn't quite the same. For that, some of the standout tracks for me were Backstabbers, Devil Made Me Do It, Whirlwind of Doom, and Level Fix It, the title track. I definitely encourage people to check it out.
Yeah, like I said, it was definitely one that I would like to listen to a little more of to kind of get a good feel for it. But it was, again, one of the really solid releases of this month, and certainly worthy of making your top 3. So I ended up going with 5, and I probably won't always go with 5, but there were a couple that definitely were the top of my list for me, and then a couple that were a little bit unique that I wanted to call out. Wanted to start out, the top 2 were probably my 2 favorite for the month, and that starting with the band Gotus, I believe is how it's pronounced, with their self-titled album Gotus. They're a Swiss band, this is going to be the theme with my music, and not a big surprise when you know the type of metal bands I'm into, that a lot of these bands are European metal bands, because that is really where the kind of sweet spot of the music that I like. Founded in 2019, the name came from a combination of half Gotthard and half Crocus, because it was founded by Mandy Meyer, who was in both of those bands at one point. Pat Avies on drums also has been involved with Mandy Meyer. Meyer's also been involved with Asia, Cobra, Unisonic, which is obviously one of my favorite super groups that came out and kind of went away because those guys are just so busy with other stuff. They actually covered Unisonic Souls Alive back in 2020.
Good song.
That is a really good song. For this release, they've added Ronnie Romero on vocals. Born in Chile, as it turns out. He's worked with a bunch of bands: Lords of Black, Richie Blackmore's Rainbow, Elegant Weapons. Has also worked with Michael Schenker Group and Vandenberg on newer releases. So on the one hand, it's like, man, that guy's worked with some big names. On the other hand, it's like, man, this guy's been in a lot of bands. So like, I hope this act stays together, but it's just a great rocking album that, again, fits into that European rock genre that is something that I really like.
Yeah, and I think kind of to your point about Unisonic is like, to me, that was kind of the precursor of having Halloween reunite in totality, which was a great thing. I mean, the work there, the Unisonic stuff was great, and then it led to something even cooler with Halloween reuniting. As far as Ronnie Romero goes, like, he seems like another one of those kind of younger dudes who's just a really great singer. And I think a lot of times, especially when you're talking Frontiers records, that tends to be the formula where they have kind of the older musicians who've been around a while, and then they recruit some sort of virtuosic singer to match up with them. And in this case, it works really well, so can't really argue with it.
Yeah, I'm really excited to actually give the album a few listens and really dig into it. But that is, you want to find like an album that really sums up my music taste as far as metal and rock. This is one. And if not this one, certainly the next one. The band is called Grand, and the title of the album is Second to None. They're from Sweden. Again, another European metal band. But man, this is like straight out of like 80s arena rock. Makes a ton of sense because they list on their website being influenced by Starship, Foreigner, and Toto.
Yeah, exactly.
You hear that and you hear this music and you're like, yeah, the opening track is one definitely to check out. Crash and Burn sounds exactly like a song from the mid to late 80s in rock. This is a band you absolutely could have seen on tour with a lot of those 80s hard rock, arena rock type of bands. And again, that's an era of music that I really do love. And this is a newer band that's basically trying to fit into that genre. And again, I think they really knocked it out of the park with this one.
Yeah, I think a lot of times that 80s kind of mainstream rock sound gets maligned and isn't really treated as classic rock as much as stuff that predates it. But I mean, this is clearly a group that heard Foreigner and said, that's what music is supposed to sound like. Let's run with it. And I'm totally in favor of more bands kind of pursuing that route. It's not even so much metal as much as just melodic rock. And, you know, we need more of that. So by all means, run with it.
Yeah, definitely. It was definitely it was great to listen to that and think, okay, there's actually bands out there that are both influenced by that and also wanting to create more of that type of music. And I hope that continues. The other three choices on my list are all a little bit different than those first two, but I wanted to include them all because I really thought these were all standout releases. The first was Manticora with, I believe it is called Mycelium. I'm not 100%
That's what I'm running with.
That's what we're going with. They're a Danish band, again, European metal, progressive power metal band with some thrash metal influences as they describe themselves on their website. Founded in 1997. This is their 10th studio album. I would say it's maybe a little bit harder than the typical European metal that I listen to, but in a good way. Great vocals, just a really rocking sound. Definitely an album that I want to get more into, but also want to go back and see some of their older stuff, because one review I saw, which was kind of a negative review, thought that the masters on this were maybe a little flatter than some of their other releases. I didn't notice that, but obviously this is the first album of theirs that I've listened to, so I'd love to go back, check out the rest of their catalog. But if you love hard rock, especially a little bit more on the harder side than those first two bands I mentioned, Manticora, definitely check that out.
Yeah, my exposure to them has been somewhat limited. I did listen to a little more of the album yesterday, but yeah, definitely a cool sound. I would recommend people watch the video for the Mycelium song. It looks like someone's like final project for their video editing course or something to that effect. It's very creative and different. But yeah, again, another band that's been around since the 90s. Like, where did we fail that this was never exposed to a larger audience here in America?
Yeah, that's one of the most disappointing things when we find these bands. And we'll be talking about a lot of these bands as we go into the vault over the coming weeks. And we're going to try to expose people to some of these groups that unfortunately don't make it on even satellite radio. I mean, that was always the appeal of satellite radio, is that we're going to get to hear stuff we don't get to hear on the radio. And it feels like more than ever, it has become very mainstreamed as well, where you're hearing the same songs over and over again. Yeah,
I think somewhere along the lines, even though they're probably not playing exactly the same stuff that you'd hear on mainstream, terrestrial radio, it feels like the directions they did decide to go in are still very limited and not where I would take things. Do we need both a lithium and a turbo channel when you could actually find rock that is never played over here and highlight it?
Yeah, they should just have a whole channel of rock that is not played on satellite radio as a satellite radio channel. And I would love that, because there's so much of it out there. And we're hoping to find it and be able to share it with you.
I would prefer to not have to bring in Chris Jericho to your metal channel just on the hopes that I can hear Halloween every now and then.
That's true. But I feel like that's the only shot you have.
Pretty much so, yeah.
Or you can have Eddie Trunk tell you about UFO for the 50th time, which is fine. I mean, I'd rather hear that than the same.
There's an audience for that.
5 Ozzy songs over and over again on satellite radio. But so Manticora, definitely check that out. The other two, it's either Vipassi or Vipassi. I'm not 100% sure. Apologies to those guys. Australian band with the album Lightless. It's their second album release. They are an instrumental band. They do not have a vocalist, but their music is so interesting to me. I think you can classify some of it as speed metal. Some of it sounds like melodic metal. Some of it is almost like folk metal. Reminds me very much of Dream Theater in that their songs kind of, not necessarily the sound, but the way their songs kind of weave in and out of different genres in the same song. Every song is so different on this album, which is so interesting. And I think if they had a vocalist, does this make the list? I don't know. But with the fact it's instrumental, it was so different to me. It's such an interesting listen. These guys are obviously incredibly talented, and I kind of want to see more from them because it is so different than really anything else that we had on the list this month.
Yeah, I'm not the largest fan of instrumental only music. I mean, bands that have instrumental tracks, I tend to like them, but I still think sometimes you're missing something when you don't have the vocalist. But what I've listened to from these guys, I'm not sure yet where one would fit in. Like, to me, their music, to your point, it kind of sounds like a bunch of bridges from Dream Theater songs that are just strung together. Very different, very interesting. Would make really good background music when you're working or working out. Just really cool sounding stuff.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear more from these guys. Very, very interesting group. Our final choice this month, and there were a lot of good ones to choose from, but I went with Metalite with Expedition 1. They are Swedish power metal. Once again, Australia was the only non-European metal country that got included here, but we're back to Sweden. Female-led group led by Erica Olsen. Very strong vocals from Erica Olsen. This is their 4th studio album. I think, to try to sum this up, it's kind of pop metal, I think is a good way to describe it. Blabbermouth had a review on it where they reviewed it pretty well. Mentioned the single Aurora is high-spec power metal possessed by the spirit of 80s hard rock and yet located squarely at modern metal's cutting edge, at least sonically. I'm not sure 100% what that means, but it kind of fits there. It's a long album, 16 tracks, so they definitely saved them up to put on this album. It's very upbeat, very positive. I think sometimes metal music does get a reputation of kind of being dark and brooding, and this is the opposite of that. This is very much... you want metal music, it's going to put you in a good mood. This album is one of those. It's, again, powerful sound. I don't want to say typical of a female lead singer group because it is a little bit different than some of the other ones we've listened to over the years, like Xandria, for example. But it was really good. I definitely want to know more about this group and continue to listen to this album, as it was so long. I haven't gotten through all the tracks yet, but what I've heard of it, I definitely like it.
Yeah, I've enjoyed what I've listened to so far too. Just what little I read about them, it kind of sounds like that there's this Edwin Primberg, and it's kind of his creative vehicle, and he just needed the right voice for it. And he's now on to, like, I think it's the second lead singer, who's Erica Olsen. That's kind of the voice of what he's creating, and it's definitely different, almost conceptual, like in its delivery. It just feels like someone telling a story about space or something. It's really bizarre, but yeah, cool stuff so far. So I'll be anxious to hear more of it.
Yeah, so those are our new release choices, and definitely some different groups. Some of them have been around for a while. Some of them are kind of new in their careers, but there should be something for everybody in those 8 albums and bands that we listed. We're going to step aside. When we come back, we're going to go to the vault. Mike and I are each going to share an album with you that was influential in our music fandom. We'll do that on the other side of this time out here on the Nerdcast Empire. Back on the Nerdcast Empire, we are talking music and what will eventually be our weekly music episode of the Nerdcast Empire. Don't forget to check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. You can obviously listen to all of our episodes there. You can get our episodes wherever you get your podcast each and every Sunday, and we'll be having more content throughout the week. So be checking in throughout the week on Nerdcast Empire. We're on all the social media platforms, even new ones that keep coming out. I just keep adding accounts just to make it completely impossible that I'll ever be able to keep all of them updated, but I will do my best. Hopefully continuing to branch out on more content as we move forward on the Nerdcast Empire. Coming up next week, we're going to be talking anime on the Nerdcast Empire. It's going to be very much in the same format of this show, where we talk about some of the new stuff that we've watched, maybe new releases coming up, and then something from the Vault, a show that we've watched that was influential. And we've got a ton of stuff in the Vault. The Vault might actually be a bigger segment early in that show than it will be even in the music show, but that'll be coming up next week on the Nerdcast Empire. And then a week from Monday, we'll have our first weekly episode of the Music Mondays of the Nerdcast Empire, so make sure you check that out then. We're going to head to the Vault now in our final segment. We're going to talk about albums that were influential in our music fandom. We're going to start with you. Obviously, we have talked about considerably on this podcast that you are very much a physical CD collector. You like to own the actual CDs, so you literally have a vault. And I think most of the stuff I have, at least from the early episodes, will also be the same, but there will probably be more digital stuff later on. But looking at your collection, it's very easy to see kind of how your music tastes have evolved, and it'll be really interesting for the weeks to come to kind of share some of that with our listeners so that they can see, these bands, these albums that really made a difference in your music career. So what are you starting with this week from the Nerdcast Empire Vault?
Yeah, definitely more of a physical collector. Always have been. I'm old. I like having the tangible item in front of me. And a lot of what I listened to was influenced by kind of my early searches for new bands in the early 2000s. In doing so, you try to find what had cool sounding names, or, that's how I got into Halloween, Sonata Arctica, Ed Guy, which is definitely a different sounding name. But I always kind of like progressive music, anything that has like concepts behind it. You think of like Queensryche's Operation Mindcrime, you think any Dream Theater album, just anything like that, I really enjoy. And I stumbled into a band back then called Shadow Gallary. The first album of theirs that I'd heard of was an album called Tyranny, which I'll likely cover some point down the road too. But really cool concept album, just really melodic, very progressive. Before that, in 1995, they had an album called Carved in Stone, which is what I'm actually looking at today. The band Shadow Gallary formed way back in the early 80s. We're kind of more of just a studio band. From what I've gathered, they had several attempts at touring over the years. It never really panned out for one reason or another. The lead singer actually passed away back in 2008, which obviously is terrible and unfortunate. Their album that came out not long after that included a bunch of guest vocals, including Ralph Sheepers, Clay Barton, basically to get the album across the finish line, which that album, Digital Ghost, I would certainly recommend that as well. Going back to Carved in Stone, there's 20 tracks on it. Most of the tracks have segues in between them, which are individual tracks themselves. The last song is like an 8-part song called Ghost Ship. So very proggy, very different. If you want to check that out, I would definitely check out the tracks Cliffhanger, Crystalline Dream, Warcry, Deeper Than Life, and Alaska. Just very, at times, heavy and fast, sometimes really mellow. Just a really different and cool album.
You look at the artists that are on this, you already mentioned Mike Baker, of course, we lost back in 2008. You look at the instruments, Carl Cadden James, bass, flute, like
exactly.
Gary Weirkamp, piano, synthesizer. Like, this is a rock group, a metal group, but it feels very prog in a lot of ways because you have so many sounds on this album that are different than really just about any other group at that time. And again, the whole concept album, you look at the track listing that goes just shy of an hour and 20 minutes. And you got all these Ghost Ship 1, The Gathering, the night before, all the way through Ghost Ship 8, which is the ending. And that's 7 minutes and 24 seconds. You have these instrumental tracks that are in between these lyrical tracks, and obviously well regarded. Shadow Gallery, really, really talented band. It's a shame, unfortunately, that we'll never see a full reunion of the group, but definitely an interesting album, and one that, again, really explains a lot of the choices you'll be making each and every week on this show. When you look at an album like this, I'm sure has influenced so many of these other bands that we're talking about each and every week. Yeah,
absolutely. The flute's actually fairly pronounced in a couple of the tracks. I think I want to say Alaska is one where you hear it pretty heavily. But yeah, it's just it's not just progressive metal. Like it's kind of all across the board. Some of the songs are actually very piano driven and just almost beautiful sounding, I would say. But yeah, I mean, anytime you have something with a sound like that, it's probably going to get my attention. I would say Tyranny, and then later on albums like Room 5 are heavier, but this one's definitely a good place to start.
Yeah, I'm always a fan of these rock and metal groups that do stuff that's outside the box, and I feel like this is a group that was not afraid to do that and had a lot of success at it, and that, again, makes for fun music to listen to. I think when we complain about certain eras in music on this show, and we will, a lot of times it's because so many groups fell into the trap of sounding the same or doing the same thing. And it, when you hear it at first, it's like, oh, that's not bad. And then you hear it the 50th time and you're like, I'm totally done with this. Groups like Shadow Gallery weren't like that. They kind of fit into their own thing, which meant they were going to have success over long periods of time because they weren't going to be defined necessarily by the era in which they were created.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting with the stuff we're finding now is that with the availability of recording equipment and kind of the affordability of it, I think groups are a lot more encouraged to do their own thing. And there's not that pressure of, hey, we just spent thousands and thousands of dollars on studio time. Like we this thing has to sell. I don't think that was the case in 1995. Like, I don't think you're just gifted a fully functional studio for free where it's like, hey, we can pursue whatever kind of creative passion we want. And it doesn't matter if this ever hits or anything.
Yeah. I think the fact that groups were able to take those chances when the chances were so much more expensive to take back then really says a lot for them. So you chose something that was obviously, I don't want to say different, but obviously, interesting. Maybe I chose something that was a little more mainstream, but
sure.
But it also in its own way was interesting. And one of my favorite groups of all time was the Eagles. And we talk about albums that influence. The first Eagles album I owned was the live album, Eagles Live. It was released on November 7th, 1980. It was a 2 CD set of concert footage. The reason that album was released in the first place is because the band was breaking up. They were never getting back together. When you hear a little bit about this album, you'll see kind of amazing they got back together. They owed their record label another album, and they were basically not on speaking terms at this point, especially with Glenn Frey. So they decided to go ahead and do a concert album. So they released performances from the Hotel California and the Long Run tours on this album to try to fulfill that last album. The only new track on the album is Seven Bridges Road, which is a great song with fantastic harmonies. Really, if you want to play for somebody the best of the Eagles as far as vocally, I think Seven Bridges Road is a song that kind of shows what they can do. But then the stories from Wikipedia about this album, Glenn Frey refused to speak to any of the other band members, would not join them for overdubs for the album. Therefore, it was done piecemeal. Frey was in Los Angeles. The rest of the band was in Miami with Don Henley overseeing the post-production process. Tapes were sent back and forth between the two locations until the album was completed. One guy had his assistant in Los Angeles with Glenn Frey and had the rest of the band fly to Miami. They were fixing 3-part harmonies courtesy of Federal Express, was the quote that was listed in Wikipedia. 5 different lawyers were thanked in the liner notes of the live album.
Wow.
So that tells you where they were at that point. The Eagles were offered $2 million. And again, this is $2 million in 1980. So who knows how much that is now from the label if they would record 2 new songs for the album, and they refused it because they just knew that was not going to be able to happen. But it was the album that turned me on to the Eagles, really got me into being a big fan. It's an amazing live album, and really more amazing when you hear what had to happen for this album to even exist.
Yeah, I mean, I knew obviously there was a lot of tension between the members of the band, but I didn't realize it was to that degree at that point. The Eagles are one of the few bands, I think, and I'm trying to think of who else might qualify. Maybe Cheap Trick, where live versions of their songs are kind of more iconic than the studio versions. And I think with this live album and then Hell Freezes Over, years later, those are just classic albums that are just live recordings.
I think it takes a special kind of band to be able to play their music and almost play it better live than they play it in the studio. And I don't know if some of that comes from the tensions of the band in the 70s, that maybe some of the studio recordings turned out to be just kind of a nightmare. So when they mixed the masters, maybe it wasn't what it could have been. Like, they were good. Obviously, they were big hits. But when they actually got together on stage and they couldn't fight because they were in front of the people, they produced this magic that ended up really captivating anybody who would listen to it. And this album sounds as great today, more than 40 years later, as it did back in 1980. And obviously, I was very, very young when this came out, and you were not even born when this came out. And that's part of the reason why I think I didn't even understand to the level of animosity there was in the band. It is pretty amazing. These guys were able to put their differences aside and actually get back together and make music for another 20 plus years until Frey passed away, of course.
Yeah, I probably hadn't even been aware of the Eagles until a few years prior to their reunion. So to me, it didn't really feel like such a long divorce as it really was. The thing about the Eagles, I think even if you're not a huge fan of that kind of music, they transcend that.
Yeah.
I think if a new band came out and had a similar sound, it would be unlikely that I would listen to it and say, oh, I really enjoy this. It's just, there's something different about them and what they create that bridges music tastes.
Yeah, 100%. I think that is the biggest selling. And I don't even know if you can create a band like that nowadays, that you can appeal to people who like rock music and people who like even hard rock music and people who like country music and people who like folk music, because the Eagles had all of it and they somehow walked the line between all of those things. Like you hear a song like Life in the Fast Lane, you think I could see a heavy metal band being influenced by a song like Life in the Fast Lane. You hear Seven Bridges Road, like that's a country song. Seven Bridges Road's a country song, at least in modern
darn
country.
near bluegrass.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And that's a band that was able to do all of those things and do them at an incredibly high level. And I don't know if there'll ever be another band quite like them. And that's why I think a perfect choice for my first edition of the Vault.
Yeah, I was trying to think of any other artists that may fit that kind of build of they transcend whatever you normally listen to. I would think maybe something like Gordon Lightfoot.
Yeah.
He's another guy that any other artist that sounds like him, I probably wouldn't care that much about, but I enjoy his music. Maybe to some degree, like a Marty Robbins.
Yeah. Yeah. We talk about that could definitely be another artist on the Vault, because if you find another artist who was heavily influenced my music taste, Marty Robbins certainly did that and influenced, I think, rock music and also country music and probably bluegrass music. And obviously those, Marty Robbins and Gordon Lightfoot tied together with Ribbon of Darkness.
Yeah.
So that's a song specifically that they both had. And
it's a shame we didn't have both of them longer.
Yeah. Talk about two artists that I would have loved to have seen live and didn't get the chance to. No doubt about that. But so that's the Vault. We're going to step aside for one final quick break. We come back, we're going to talk about this program going forward that we'll do each and every week. Do that on the other side of this timeout here on the Nerdcast Empire. Back one final time on the Nerdcast Empire. Matt and Mike with you again. Next week, we're going to be talking anime on the Nerdcast Empire. Very similar format to what you're seeing in this episode. Now, typically in this segment, we talk about upcoming releases. We won't be doing that, but we will encourage you to check out Music Mondays on the Nerdcast Empire. We'll be going over these releases. We probably won't have quite as many because obviously this was a month's worth. It'll be a much smaller sample size to choose from, but the goal is to have about a 30-minute podcast to kind of spotlight some of the new music that's coming out. And if we have a week where we don't really care for much of the stuff coming out, maybe we'll talk more about music in the Vault that week, because we certainly both have a ton of it to go over. But that'll be coming up in future weeks here on the Nerdcast Empire. It's going to just about wrap things up for the music episode. Kind of want to get your final thoughts, Mike, because to me, I'm really excited about this concept just because it's going to allow me to keep up with more music. And I feel like we say that a lot on the Nerdcast Empire. Like, hey, I'm glad this is here because now we can actually, it forces us to keep up with stuff that just kind of falls by the wayside when you're not focused and actually have a goal in mind to actually stay on top of it.
Yeah, it feels bad in a way that I pretty much have to goad myself into consuming things I enjoy. It's like, oh, now you have to listen to more of the music you like. Who knew that it took pressure to actually make me do that? Same with anime. It's like, I'm gonna have to keep up with some of the news shows now. Man, that's awful. But hey, that's where we are.
It is, but we're glad to be here, and we're glad you joined us here on the Nerdcast Empire. And we'll, of course, have Chris and Rachel back on some future episodes. In fact, we've got some more WWE pay-per-view reviews coming up in future weeks. Obviously, the Elimination Chamber coming up in a couple of weeks. Be an early record time for that one because that's a 5 a.m. Eastern premium live event. So it might just be the two of us for that one as well. But looking forward to that. A lot of great stuff planned in the future weeks to come. So we encourage you to keep checking us out here on the Nerdcast Empire. Don't forget to check out our store at nerdcastempire.com/store. But that is going to wrap things up for this week, our music edition. And again, this will become a weekly episode starting a week from Monday. On the Nerdcast Empire, our Music Mondays, we'll be giving you all the latest music releases, talk about stuff in the Vault, and some upcoming releases as well. That's going to wrap things up for this week. For Mike and for everybody else involved with the Nerdcast Empire, I am Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.